Welcome back. Okay, so we are going to be completing Edpuzzle 4 in this video titled Drafting Out Our Portraits. So before you get started, you're going to need a few things. A pencil with an eraser, your gridded paper from Padlet 6, so that's just the white piece of paper that we gridded out last class that has the columns and the rows drafted on it, and then access to your gridded selfie. So whatever you posted for Padlet 5, that was just a quick reminder. That was what we used Art Tutor for to grid out our photos. Okay. So disclaimer, during this Edpuzzle, you will be expected to follow along on your own paper. At the end, you will be responsible for posting your in-progress drawing for Padlet 7, and we'll get into that, what that looks like when we start the actual slides. You cannot receive full credit if you are missing the Padlet 7. This is a two-parter, just like our last Edpuzzle, meaning you have to do the Edpuzzle and post your work alongside it. Otherwise, you cannot receive full credit. Please make sure to read all instructions carefully. I will also be reading them out loud. Okay, so overview. I know we've talked about this a bunch, but what is gridding? What is grid enlarging? Why are we using it? What is the purpose? So gridding or grid enlarging, as we've talked about, is the process of using a grid to precisely copy and enlarge a smaller image to transfer it over onto a larger canvas, or in our case, just a larger paper or just paper in general. So if you notice here on the left-hand side, this would be the gridded out photo. And then you can see the drawing. It is gridded out or grid enlarged, where the artist has copied the photo onto a piece of paper and drawn it in pencil. So we're doing this. Why are we doing this? We're going to be using this technique to begin drafting or lightly drawing out our own portraits, our own self-portraits. By breaking the image down into smaller pieces, it actually makes it easier for our brains to map out what we are trying to draw. So if you notice, I have my selfie over here on the left. This is the one I've been using as my example. And then over on the right, this is me starting to map out my self-portrait on my gridded paper. So ultimately, this is going to be what you're going to be posting for Padlet 7. It does not need to be finished. I'm just looking for the drafted out beginning image of your portrait. Okay, so we're drawing very lightly for this. So things to remember. As you are drawing, you want to draw loose and light until you get it right. If you are bearing down on that pencil, it is going to be incredibly difficult to go back and erase any mess up lines. Okay. And then focus, secondly, on the large and basic shapes for now, and the details will come later. And we're going to watch a brief clip over on the right of what it is that I'm talking about. But I just wanted to point out these two things because these are going to be key for drafting out our portraits for right now. Okay. So notice here, as an example, we have this image of a seagull on the top, and I'm going to play a very short clip by Drawing 101 that kind of goes over how to draft out those basic shapes.
Let's take a look at this bird. We're just going to look at basic shapes. We're not going to get overwhelmed with all of the details. And when we see those basic shapes, we can draw those basic shapes at the beginning stages of the drawing. The beginning stages of a drawing are the most important stages of the drawing. Once we learn to find those shapes in the subjects that we're drawing, we can create highly detailed drawings because we have a structure in place. So let's look at the process with the bird. We'll start with the shape of the head, which is basically an oval. Notice I'm drawing several lines to draw the oval. It's a good idea to be loose with your marks, especially in the early stages of the drawing. The bill comes out and creates somewhat of a triangle, and I'm going to define the form a little bit more than I would with just a triangle. The neck is simply a rectangular.
And I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead. But what I'm wanting you guys to notice is, I know it might be a little bit hard to hear, but what they're doing is they're breaking down that bird, which has a lot of detail, a lot of shadows, color, and they're breaking it down into really simple shapes. So you'll notice an oval for the body, a rectangle for the neck, a circle for the head, and they're just breaking it down into these very, very simple shapes. And notice that he's drawing very, very lightly, and he's kind of going in this sketchy motion where he's going back over the lines a bunch of times until he gets that form right. So if we jump ahead, you'll see that it doesn't even include the eye or anything like that. He's just adding in those basic shapes and he's adding to it over time. So originally he just started with just the one tail feather and then he went back and added 2 and 3. And then he's going back in to add a little bit of value around the head. So, and again, what I'm trying to get you guys to understand is that it starts from very, very basic shapes. So from this to that, and then ultimately a final drawing. So at the end of this Edpuzzle, you guys are just going to be responsible for creating those very, very basic shapes. I'm not looking for tons and tons of detail just yet. No texture, anything like that, just the basic shapes. And that's going to be our goal for today. So step 1, locating our gridded selfie. So if you have not completed Padlet 5, your gridded selfie, please do not proceed. You have to do that first before doing this Edpuzzle. Otherwise, you won't have anything to work with. So locating your gridded selfie, pretty easy. So last week we worked on gridding out our selfie photos using Art Tutor and we posted them for Padlet 5. Just log into Padlet as you normally would and find your posted gridded selfie. When you find it, it's going to look something like this up here on the right, where it's kind of just like that little thumbnail size. I want you to click on it so that it fills the entire page and leave it like that. When you're done, come back over to Edpuzzle, and when it is time to use that photo, I will give you pause points to be able to go back and look at it. But for right now, just take a second, pause, and make sure that you have that photo ready to go. Step 2, counting out your boxes. So this part might seem a little bit complicated, so I'm going to try to go through it as clearly as I possibly can. But again, if you get stuck or you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. So since we gridded out our white papers to have 5 columns and 6 rows, we will need to go back and match up our photographs. So in order to do this, we need to frame 5 columns and 6 rows on our gridded selfie. Okay, so again, your white paper has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, so up and down sections, right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. If your gridded paper does not have that, you need to go back and fix it, okay? So every single one of your papers should have 5 columns and 6 rows. Now, when we gridded out our selfies using Art Tutor, we all created 5 columns. However, we all have a different number of rows. Some of you guys have 4, some of you have 6. It totally depends on how elongated or how long your photo was. So this means that some of you are going to end up having to crop your photo, or you're going to have a little bit of extra space. So again, for example, if I'm looking at my photo right here, this was a photo I uploaded of my dog Kira, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rows. But since we need 6, I know that I'm going to have to crop one of these rows. So whether it's the bottom or the top, okay? You will frame your gridded selfie by counting out 5 columns and 6 rows. This will be the area you draw on your gridded paper. So if I were to draw this image of my dog, I would probably crop out this row number 7, and then I would just focus on this section right here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. So just take a second right now. I want you to take a minute to count how many rows your gridded photo has. So Padlet 5, will you need to crop off a row, or will you have extra space? So again, it has to be 5 columns and 6 rows. So in the case of Kira, I had to crop a row. Some of you might have extra space, so maybe you only had 4 rows, and some of you, like this photo of Kira, might have 6, so you're going to need to crop it, okay? So answer here. Step 3, drafting out your large shapes. Drafting out your large shapes. Think back to the seagull example at the start of this video. You will be using the same process to begin drafting out the large shapes of your selfie for your self-portrait. Remember, draw light and loose. You will be going back and making adjustments later on, so you want to make sure that you're able to erase lines. So again, guys, just like the example of the seagull, We have, you're going to be looking for those basic shapes and starting to draft them out on your portrait. So here again, I have my selfie image right here, and I've started to draft myself out on my gridded paper. So pause here. What do you notice about my drawing technique? What type of pressure am I using? What type of mark making am I using? Answer here. As you notice, a lot of you guys probably said loose or light or squiggly or messy, and those are all perfectly fine answers, and you are exactly right. It's not meant to be a perfect drawing. In fact, it kind of resembles contour drawing that we went over last semester. So if you take a look at my drawing of my selfie, I've started to break it down into really basic shapes to help me kind of figure out where everything goes. So I put a rectangle for the body, 2 ovals for the head and 2 more for the ears, an oval for the palm of the hand, a rectangle for the wrist. And then I started adding in those smaller details. So I'm working my way up to them. So I started with the biggest shapes first and then the smaller ones as I kept going. And eventually, you're going to have a whole drafted out portrait. Pause here. I want you to begin to draft out your portrait on your gridded piece of white paper. This should take a minimum of 25 minutes to do, and it does not need to be perfect. This is just the starting step, but just remember to draw light. Step 4, posting our progress. Step 4, posting our progress. Once you have finished drafting out your selfie on your gridded paper, you will post an image to your Padlet 7 drafting out our portrait photo. This step in drafting out your portrait should take a minimum of 25 minutes. So please don't post a Padlet 7 that took maybe 5 minutes to do. I really want you to take your time on this before posting your progress shot. This is in no means a final piece of artwork. This is just showing me where you're at, but I am specifically looking for, did you start to draft out the big or large shapes of your photo and of your face and your shoulders for your Padlet? If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. And please make sure that you've posted Padlet 7 and completed this as Edpuzzle in order for you to have completed your work for today.